Thanks very much, Professor Maseko. Lovely to be here. Um, Obviously, very warm welcome to our esteemed delegates from the Institute of World Economics and Politics, from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Professor Adam Habib, the Director of SOAS, Professor Busani Ngaweni, Principal of National School of Government. Thank you very much for your invitation to us to co-host this event with you. And welcome to our campus here at the Parktown Management Campus. Prof. Themba Maseko, the head of the Wits School of Governance, thank you very much for hosting this event. Thank you to all the partners and representatives of the that made this event possible, from the Institute of Global Dialogue, the Institute of World Economics and Politics, UNISA, and the National School of Government. All the other distinguished colleagues and guests who are online, of course, welcome very much to you. As Dean of the Faculty, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the university and open this important and necessary conversation on advancing inclusive and equitable global governance and development in times of polycrisis. There is, of course, little doubt that we collectively face multiple global crises and challenges that are colliding. Climate change, economic inequalities, digital transformation and cyber threats, water scarcity, geopolitical conflicts, public health pandemics and disease, trade wars, declining international cooperation, amongst others. These can no longer be easily untangled from one another, and which some therefore suggest are now posing a catastrophic risk to humanity, with the potential for extreme outcomes across the globe. And this collision of crises should then be of significant concern, deserving of our urgent responses, and in particular, responses that sit outside the realm of what some might label normal politics. If these intersecting and interdependent crises are testing the stability and limits of global governance systems, then we should not delay in rethinking the architecture of these global governance systems, rethinking their institutions and practices and their underpinning philosophies. We need to explore the extent to which global governance systems and practices have exclusionary effects, impeding efforts to tackle various multiple interconnected crises, and confront questions of whether global governance is holding back efforts of the global South to reduce poverty and advance development and sustainable economic growth. This critique of the status quo inevitably leads to further questions on the different ways of achieving more inclusive global governance forms and more meaningful and effective inclusion of stakeholders and non-state actors and civil society, and on innovating new systems that are better able to weigh competing interests and balance the distribution of power. I'm so pleased, therefore, that the university can serve as a platform for hosting today's seminar and provide a space for honest and critical conversations that will no doubt ensue. We recently celebrated our university's centenary, which presented us a perfect moment for imagining our next 100 years and the sort of institution that we want to be, firmly embedded in Africa and the global South, and committed to ensuring our academic programs, our research, and our public engagements serve the communities in which we are embedded and are directed toward addressing the many social and sustainable development challenges our world is facing. And this seminar is an opportunity for us to do just that. The theme of this seminar is also a wonderful expression of the priorities that have been laid down for our country's presidency of the G20 under its theme of solidarity, equality, sustainability. A recognition that we need to acknowledge our global interdependence and seek collective solutions and equitable responses to the pressing challenges that threaten global economic growth, development, and stability. Today's seminar represents one instance of such a collective spirit, and with the involvement of multiple institutions. Now more than ever, universities, policymakers, civil society, and all stakeholders need to come together in forums such as this to contribute solutions for the greater good. So welcome once again, and on behalf of the faculty and the university, I wish you fruitful and interesting deliberations and of course, an opportunity for some good old-fashioned networking. Thanks very much and welcome again.
Thank you so much, Professor Jason, for that warm welcome. We are truly grateful to have you making the time to be here. And we will be moving right along, but I just want to make sure that are we audible to the online audience? Are we? Thank you so much. You know, you don't want to be talking and then other people are left out and unintentionally. At this juncture, we're going to be calling Professor Busani, but maybe you want to know my name. My name is Telela Ngataneviga. I'm an academic here at the Vet School of Governance. And my role today is to try to direct the program together with you. As Professor Busani is making his way to the podium, we're meeting at a very critical moment when the public discourse is asking pertinent questions as raised by Professor Jason on the potential, perhaps, of Africa's role in the South-South dialogue to advance the inclusive development and governance reform, and the conversations and many questions whether we need reforms or the South-South has got potential to advance them. And many more will be answered today. Of course, elsewhere, arguments are being advanced on what is even inclusive and equitable global governance and whether or not those ideals must be pursued or not. And these will be answered through the concept note and also the discussions that will happen here. Professor Busani, you will also do the same. In the light of equality, there's that word, the inclusive and equitable. I've introduced myself. Do you want to introduce yourself? I'm excusing myself from introducing him. I'm trying to practice equity, you know.
Thank you. Good morning to you all, including the colleagues who are joining us online. My name is Busani Ngaweni, as introduced. I'm the DG of the National School of Government. We do a series of webinars and masterclasses like these as the National School of Government, and we partner with a variety of institutions locally and internationally. We do a lot of them hybrid because it allows us an opportunity to reach people wherever they are. And through strategic partnerships like these ones with the Vet School of Governance, we could come here. Besides, of course, the content and the substance of what we will be engaging on, we believe that we also must play an important role in making connections between institutions, since we've got a wider network of relationships in the continent and beyond. And when I got the message from Prof. Habib that he is in town, I said, well, I'm going to hijack you to join this session so that in addition to the Institute for Global Dialogue and the NSG, we can also have IWEB, which is part of CAS, and Prof. Gao will do some introduction, and also have a SOAS as well participating in this audience. So thanks, Prof. Habib, for agreeing to be hijacked. Many people will be keen to understand what your thoughts are on the subject that we are discussing. And of course, to our visiting colleagues from IWEB, which is part of CAS in Beijing, we are warm welcome in South Africa. I mean, I wouldn't spend too much time, narrating for you the whole concept. But the idea for us in particular who are in the public sector is that the world is changing and changing very fast. There are many instances where a public servant somewhere in a very obscure municipality in South Africa, that municipality may be having agriculture as their key economic activity, producing products that may find their way into the plates of people in New York or Shanghai. And because of decisions taken elsewhere, very far, in Washington or in Beijing, you suddenly have a municipality that is unable to export their products, or that exporting their products is suddenly double the amount it was costing a month ago. And of course, if you are leading in that type of a municipality, all the assumptions that you have made about the economic activities in that very small local space will now be disrupted because of the decisions that are taken elsewhere. And as you'll hear from the speakers who will be talking here, that some of the disruptions and the crises taking place at a global governance level with all the institutions of global governance, whether it's World Trade Organization or any other type, suddenly may now have to play a much bigger role in helping to protect the products of that small, obscure municipality. And yet in their ability to do so, they may be hampered or hindered by the fact that there are decisions taken in global capitals that may be questioning the legitimacy of that global, institution like WTO amongst the others. And now they are wondering how they can actually intervene to help secure productivity in that small, obscure municipality. Those who work in the health space have already been experiencing the same because of what has been happening to the WTO. And so it is of interest to every public servant in South Africa, in Africa, and throughout the world to have a much greater understanding of some of these global shifts because they have an impact on the work that they do, regardless of where they are. There is none amongst us who's not affected by decisions that are taken at a global level. And most of us who are senior public servants, of course, must advise and support our political principals, our institutions to help navigate these global crises, as it were. And so the idea was we bring some of the prominent thinkers to have an engagement with them about these matters today. Many of those who are attending virtually are actually very senior public servants, wherever they are in the country and beyond, who are interested in having this understanding and gaining this perspective. And that is why we are here today. It has a direct impact on people in their workspaces, wherever they are, and we hope that people will gain a lot from it. As I said, we've got Professor Adam Habib from SOAS, who will be making an input, and then we've got Professor Gao and the team from IWEB. I've asked that he must say something about IWEB so you understand it in a bigger, context and why it is important. And of course, locally, we've got the colleagues from the Institute for Global Dialogue, IGD. I must say, on behalf of Pilanem Tembu, he sends his apologies, but he has sent a colleague. They will also be joining online. We then have the colleagues from here at VETS, including at the business school as well, who will be participating. So thank you once again for being here. We hope we'll all gain and benefit something from our engagement today. Thank you. Sorry, I'm not trying to be cool. I had an eye operation 2 days ago, so I have to wear these glasses. So I see all of you differently with shades of gray and so on. So I'm not trying to be cool or disrespecting you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Prof. Busani, for also explaining those glasses. And I was beginning to think, is that movie, with Russian spies in the mist and, those kind of movies. Thank you so much for giving us that introduction. Now we're going to invite to the podium the keynote speaker, who is Professor Adam Habib. Professor Adam Habib is no stranger to this university. In fact, I think he still calls this university his home. He's an academic and activist, a public intellectual. He's the Vice Chancellor and Director of SOAS, University of London, and previously Vice Chancellor and Principal of this university. You remember that time, right? Can't miss it. I don't need to remind you of that time. It was a wonderful time, and the students all over the place. And I remember seeing him on the floor at some point, that kind of Vice Chancellor. He holds qualifications in political science from the University of Natal, Wits, and City University of New York, Professor Habib is a co-founder of the African Research Universities Alliance, an affiliation of research-intensive universities on the continent. He has published numerous edited books, book chapters, and journal articles over the last 3 decades in the thematic areas of democratization and its consolidation in South Africa, contemporary social movements, philanthropy, inequality, giving, and its impact on poverty, alleviation and development, institutional reform, changing identities, and the evolution in the post-apartheid era, and South Africa's role in Africa and beyond. His most recent books include South Africa's Suspended Revolution, I saw him signing it, Hopes and Prospects, and Ripples and Rage, reflecting on fees must fall. You remember that word. You couldn't forget it. Professor Habib, you're welcome at this podium. We really want to hear your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. I want to start with a couple of quick introductory remarks, but I thought I should say thank you first to Busani and obviously to Temba and the team for inviting me to share my thoughts. It's a real pleasure to be here and to have to speak to these issues. I gave a lecture earlier this week at the University of Pretoria on the same thematic issues. And so this is something that's animating me, and it's clearly something that this country is grappling with. I want to also say it gives me a wonderful excuse to come home and to spend some time here. And so it's lovely to be back at WITS. I have a much longer paper than I have 20 minutes, and I've got a much longer paper. So what I'm going to do is Busadi's got a copy of the paper, and I've asked Busadi to circulate the paper. So you have the pleasure so you'll have the pleasure of looking at the paper in detail. But what I thought I'd do is just speak to the big questions of the paper in the next 20 minutes. And that's what I'm going to quickly focus on. I'll start here. Perhaps I should say one other thing. And that is, forgive me because I'm going to be quite blunt and I'm going to be quite open. I think we're in a moment where we can't be overly diplomatic and ambiguous about what our ideas are. I think we're in a very, very dangerous historical moment for the world, but for South Africa in particular. And I think we need to have the courage to identify what the challenges are, what the causal features of the problem are, and what to do about it. And so forgive me when I am blunt and I push against what are orthodoxies that have developed in South Africa. But I do so from a deep, deep patriotism. This is my home. This is where I will come back. This is where my family is. And it is absolutely crucial that we learn to make sure that we survive as a country and as a community and as that liberation project that we had promised at the dawn of 1994. What is the central part of my argument? The central part of my argument is that we live in a very dangerous moment. And that Donald Trump's tariff wars are just the latest salvo in an attack on globalization by the US. The US has been the architect of this globalized project. But it has reached a moment where it wants the benefits of that globalized project, but it doesn't want to pay the responsibilities. And as a result of that, you've seen the emergence of the status quo. But Donald Trump is merely the latest symptom. If you go back the last 20 years, you will see elements of this consistently emerging. You saw it in the Iraq War. You saw it in the way the US and the West actually engaged in the 2008 crisis. You saw it in the weaponization of the dollar for narrow foreign policy goals by not only the Republicans, but also by the Democrats. You saw it in the selective application of international law in Kosovo, in Iraq, in Ukraine, and now in Gaza. And so you saw it in the national chauvinism around vaccine allocations during the COVID war. So what you're beginning to see in this crisis, this unraveling of the global order, is happening as part of a consistent process that has been playing out for over 20 years. And so we shouldn't be surprised by it. Having said that, there are some people who are thrilled about the prospect, because what they see this as this world order unravels, they see society and many parts of the developing world being freed from the shackles of what they see as Western hypocrisy. Others, perhaps a minority, the DA, AfriForum in South Africa, even the government of the DRC, have preferred a more alignment with the superpower in the hope that they get, if you like, benefits. The country gets benefits from alignment with the superpower. But it is fair to say that the majority of the political elite in this country, and I think the majority of the political elite on the continent, prefer what has become to known as a strategic autonomy. An autonomy that allows you to navigate the world order, to derive and negotiate the best benefits that you can, and to deploy that for the benefits of your citizens. Now, we're not the only power, South Africa, that believes that. India has a similar foreign policy orientation, even if its politics may be different. And Brazil has a similar foreign policy orientation. But in a sense, and this is where my challenge is, we are very different from India and Brazil. And it is, I believe, we're hopelessly out of our depth in beginning and being in a position to manage the world that is yet to come. And what my lecture is effectively about, and my reflections is today, is why is that case? What are the levers that are required for a strategic autonomy, for the ability to navigate a world order and get the benefits that is required for that? And what are the levers, and do we have those levers? And if we don't have those levers, what are we to do about it? And so that's, if you like, the substance of what I'm going to reflect on. So let's begin with the US. There is no doubt in my mind that there are two drivers that are driving US behavior. The first is the rise of China and the belief in the United States that China is a potential hegemon that is going to compete with it, whether this year, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and that's conditioning its behavior. But the second reason why the US behaves as it is because of a deep, deep polarization in the United States. And that deep polarization is driven by deep inequality in the United States and a belief that the spoils of globalization has not been shared equally by all. And the political elite has tried to deflect from that by projecting China as the great villain. And so many in the foreign policy establishment of the US, both across the aisle, are looking to what they call a containment strategy of China. That involves anti-market and anti-competitive rules and regulations that prevent technological exports and imports from China. It basically involves what I call, and what many people call, the weaponization of trade policy to advance to stem the tide of what they see as China's economic development. But the containment strategy also requires redirecting resources away to the Indo-Pacific, what they see as China's backyard. And if you want to go to the Indo-Pacific, the big thing is you don't have the resources, so what you've got to do is extricate yourself out of wars in Western Europe and the Middle East so you can devote those resources to the Indo-Pacific. That's why the big push for European countries and Japan to pay for their own defense. That's the basic push that is beginning to happen there. And Trump's policies, his tariff policies and his foreign policy decisions must be understood in this context. Yes, he's got a penchant for political theater, and he's got a hell of an ego. But actually, his containment strategy is not the act of a single individual. It is reflective of actually an agenda, a foreign policy agenda that is much wider in the United States. But whatever happens in the world of tariffs, whether the US continues with these or whether they moderate it like is likely to happen, the future of globalization is not solely in its hands, because it's also impacted on what China does, it's impacted on what Europe does, it's impacted on what other countries in the global south do, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and many others. So if China shifts its to a consumption economy, if it settles geographical conflicts with neighbors and is willing to provide global goods like defense packs and a trading currency, then you will see a restructured form of globalization. I don't think it'll happen in the short term, but it is not impossible. China, however, has become an agent of change. President Xi Jinping has accelerated his foreign policy engagements all across, mainly with the immediate emphasis in Asia, but much more broader than that. And what he has done in this foreign policy engagements is stress the importance of equality and respect in partnerships. A very clever thing, because he understands the sensitivity of political elites and the citizenry in post-colonial societies about equality and respect. It is something that Western political leaders would learn a lot from. In any case, China has been planning for this for a number of years. So in 2011, China's collection of treasury receipts was 1.3 trillion. In April 2025, it was 765 million. Consistently, China has been moving resources away from a dependence on US treasuries to buying hard assets, mines, agriculture, land, logistics infrastructure, airports, ports, all kinds of things that are hard assets that has been transformed in the last 10, 15 years that China has been focusing on. Secondly, it is worth saying that all of this has been captured around the Belt and Road Initiative. China has also got a new narrative that it has established, the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence: mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, mutual non-regression, mutual non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. These principles were in the Bandung Conference in the 1950s. They were in the non-aligned movement from the 1960s. And they are, if you like, go against the grain. They are an alternative narrative to what was the universalist doctrine advanced by the West in the last 30 years. The promotion of democracy and free markets, the insistence on individual rights and responsibilities, and the willingness to intervene across national borders to impose this in areas where they may not exist. But China is not the only player in the game. The European Union is the third player in the game. And one of the things to be most cognizant of is that as forced to effectively underwrite their own defense, their dependence on the United States weakens. The more they defend themselves, the more the United States abandons its commitment since the Second World War to provide the security of Western Europe, the more the Western Europe no longer is as dependent on the United States. And so if you take that together with the fact that the fulcrum of world trade is shifting to the Indo-Pacific, there's an incentive structure for for Europe to start thinking for an alternative pole or with alternative alliances. There are two challenges in it. First, what I call economic vibrancy, and second, political hesitancy. Economic vibrancy, although despite all of Europe's strengths in traditional industries, it has not grown since 2008 as China did, or as the United States has. Since 2008, Europe has grown by 29%. If you take the United States, 72% in its GDP. If you take China, it's an astounding 290%. And so it can't operate as an alternative pole unless it becomes also economically vibrant, and that's its big first challenge. The second is its political hesitancy. Is it wanting to be a serious player? And that means it may need to chart its own independent path, formulate its own alliances. And in that, it's still hesitant, partly because it sees China and Russia as culturally different, partly because it is not entirely sure about how it wants to lead, partly because it's so internally divided. And so the real question becomes, as we evolve into this world, is are we looking at a bipolar world, China and the US, or are we looking at a multipolar world, China, US, EU, and other players beginning to navigate that? And so that, if you like, is the evolving global order that we're beginning to see. Now, where is Africa? And where is South Africa in this order? Now, as I said early on, there's a small cohort of actors who would like us to align with the United States because they think we could get enormous benefits from this. The DA is one case. A more sycophantic version of that view is the AfriForum, and you saw this saga over the last couple of months. The third is places like the DRC, which has offered the United States access to mineral rights in exchange for resolving the war that is playing out in Goma and in the eastern DRC. And so, but it is fair to say that the vast majority of Africa's political elites and South Africa's political elites would like both its elites, I think its leadership, its parties, its activists, and I think its intellectuals, would like to see, they see the emergence of a bipolar or multipolar world as beneficial to the global South. They think you can navigate it, and they prefer what is, if you like, a strategic autonomy. Very much like India or Brazil or even the Republic of Ireland. But let's look at India or Brazil. What gives India, what is important to understand is it's very rare for powers in the global South, for countries in the global South, to succeed in navigating a multipolar or bipolar world to their own advantage. It doesn't happen. And why is it? When does it happen? Why does it happen? So if you take India, India's singular strategic asset is its size. It's 1.5 billion market. That mark gives it leverage. It can chart an independent path, but whether it's China or the United States wants access to that market. And because they want access to that market, they start making strategic concessions to it. The singular biggest strategic lever for India is its market size. The second for Brazil is its strategic location. It's a big country, both in geographic size, but in population, it's 3 times South Africa's size. And it's got enormous strategic location in South America and its incredible mineral wealth. And if you look at the Republic of Ireland, it doesn't have any significant lever in its own rights, but it's located in the European Union. And it uses the muscle of the European Union as a strategic lever to chart an independent path. Now, Africa doesn't have that, and South Africa doesn't have that. We have mineral wealth, but frankly, we have not managed it very well for the last 20 years. We have not seen it. It's part of it has been used for enrichment, but it hasn't been used as a developmental lever. We haven't used it as a cohesive lever as part of our national development strategy, as a lever to be able to negotiate our position in the global order. More importantly, for market size, Africa has a market size of 1.5 billion, but it's completely incoherent. And we're trying to address it through the Continental African Free Trade Area, which was established, launched in January 2021. But it's still at least 10 or 15 years away from full fruition. And that doesn't mean we can use it as a lever significantly. If you take South Africa, we're only looking at 63 million people, not a substantive market in the global order. Second is bureaucratic capability. Both India and Brazil have significant bureaucratic capability in their diplomatic corps. And why is that important? Because you need your diplomats to understand the world, to navigate it, to be able to be agile, to understand where we are and what's coming. And frankly, India, for all of the politics in it, has not compromised on the quality of its diplomatic corps. Brazil has got a par excellence diplomatic capability. Let me be blunt. South Africa's diplomatic corps is not that substantive. It's been squandered and it's been weakened significantly in the last 25 years. The vast majority of our diplomatic corps are failed politicians who haven't done well in municipalities. They get redeployed. Minister doesn't do well, you get put into London. That doesn't give you the ability, the wherewithal to understand what's playing on the opposite side and how to navigate it. That singular lack of professionalization in our diplomatic corps is a singular challenge for us. And if it's for us, it's as much for the rest of the continent. And so we have to come to this point. Now, it wasn't always the case, I should say. If you looked between 1994 and 2008, South Africa's diplomatic corps in the post-apartheid period was par excellence. Together, the African diplomats rebuilt the African Union institutional architecture. Conflicts between 1994 and 2008 reduced by 2/3 on the African continent, partly because of a pact between Nigeria, South Africa, and Ethiopia. Malaise, Mbeki, and Obasanjo. That underwrote the African Renaissance for a period of at least more than a decade. But since 2008, both in South Africa and in Nigeria, internal politics that we were bequeathed with has weakened us significantly, distracted us, and frankly, we're back to where we were in 1994. We've got conflicts around the continent, 35 conflicts around the continent at the moment: Ethiopia, Mozambique, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Lake Chad. Basically, you can't have strategic autonomy and developmental outcomes when your entire continent is in the throes of political conflict. So the real question is, what do we do? What do we do after we saw what played out last week? The world, there wasn't a more dramatic indication of the world is hostile. And we need to understand how to navigate a hostile world. And we need to be able to have the leverage and the diplomatic and professional agility to be able to do that. And so I'm coming to the end, and I want to just focus on 3 or 4 things. First, our singular foreign policy priority should be the free trade area. It should be the single foreign policy priority we should have. Partly because that's where our economic advantage is, but partly because that's what gives us the lever to navigate the rest of the world. If we at the heart of a 1.5 billion market, everybody wants to talk to you. And that market is going to be 3 billion by 2070. That's the largest market that's going to be on the planet. And you need the ability to be at the heart of it. That gives you leverage. That gives you far more than short-term economic gain. Second, professional excellence has to be taken seriously. In this case, it refers to the professionalization of our diplomatic corps. All governments have some political appointments, but they keep that to less than 10%. They don't have 80% of our appointments as ambassadors being political appointments. We need to re-establish the professionalization of the diplomatic corps. I will say this, that's not only can't stop at the diplomatic corps. We need the professionalization of our state. And frankly, to be honest, development state is a rhetorical tool in South Africa. It's not a reality. You can't tell me we have a professional state in a city like Johannesburg, which can't provide water. Drive in the evenings. I'm astonished every time I come back after 3-4 months. The city is even darker than it used to be before. This is not a professional civil service. It is not a professionalized municipality, and it is shocking that we've come to this point of view. If we don't fix that, we are in serious, serious trouble. And that means addressing, if you like, cadre deployment, it's addressing corruption, but it's also getting transformation right, where we put excellence at the heart of it. And then finally, we have to be aware that if you want to chart an independent path, like we did correctly on the case for the ICJ, then you must expect reprisals. You can't be saying, I'm surprised that there's a reprisal. Your public discourse can't be about Donald Trump not being fair. You say he's a fascist. What do you expect fascists to be fair? How can we have not anticipated what was coming? We should see what China had done for the last 8 to 10 years. It had planned, it had thought it through, it increased its leverage. We did none of that. We acted without planning on how we would react if there was a reprisal. That has to fundamentally change. So I say this and I end here. We live in a dangerous historical moment, which requires us to collectively behave in a manner that recognizes our interests and to chart a pathway to a realization. We will have a bipolar or multipolar world. But if we are going to navigate that world to our own advantage, whether as South Africa or Africa, then we need to develop leverage, which others take seriously. We need a government and public administration that allows us to navigate our global engagements in a manner that benefits our people. We are not there, but we can be if we have the courage to understand our circumstances, develop a path to changing this, recognize the trade-offs required, and make hard decisions. We need to transcend what has become an immature, emotionally driven politics. By the way, singing the song, Kill the Boer, is not going to feed our people. It's cheap, emotional politics. We need a mature politics that allows us to understand the choices to be made, the trade-offs to be taken, and the hard decisions to be made in that. Only then we can be the architects of our collective future. But it does require, most of all, collective courage, political decisiveness, and I hate to say, political maturity, which we've lost in our country. Thank you very, very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Habib. I'm sure all of us are reflecting at this moment. I mean, is it a bipolar, a multipolar? Which route must we go? But my favorite, why do you expect a fascist to be nice and kind and be fair? Because by the very definition, they are not, fair in nature. So I love that. We gonna move to the next engagement, and part of that, in the panel, they will also be engaging Professor Habib's insights. I'll be inviting our 4 panelists. They are on the program. I just want to make sure I pronounce names correctly. Mr. Mikatekiso Kupai, please join sir. He's a senior researcher at the Institute for the Global Dialogue associated with UNISA. He's also a fellow at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg, and a PhD candidate at the same university, an avid researcher on power and its dynamics in the international system. He specializes in the global political economy of finance. Title of his PhD research is The Role of the NDB as a Developmental Finance Institution in Support of the BRICS Reform and Development Agenda. He's a South African Association of Political Studies member and a recipient of the BRICS Mobility and Research Grant from the National Institute of Humanities and Social Sciences. Please join, sir. You can take any seat here. And our next panelist is Prof. Agayo Lingyun, who is a research fellow at the Institute of World Economics and Politics of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and the National Global Strategy think tank. He also serves as an editor-in-chief of the Journal of World Economy. His main research field is world economics. Dr. Gayo has led and completed over 30 research projects commissioned by domestic authorities such as the National Natural Science Foundation of China, National Social Science Fund of China, Research Office of the State Council, National Development and Reform Commission, Ministry of Finance, as well as international organizations, including the World Bank and the UNCTAD. He has authored 5 academic monographs and published over 50 research papers in leading journals, such as Economic Research, Journal of Management World, the Journal of World Economy, and China Economic Quarterly. Prof, may you please join us. And our next panelist is Professor T.K. Pue, who is an associate professor at the Vet School of Governance here, and focusing on 5 specialist public policy themes, including futures planning and thinking, which focuses on crafting policy decisions that attempt to ascertain what future public policy and institutional ideas can be used to address given and yet to be defined problems. Failure analysis, which investigates why policies don't achieve their intended goals or produce unexpected negative outcomes. Third, national interest study, which examines and tries to understand the fundamental goals and objectives of the state in various foreign-related policy aims and objectives. He also focuses on local development and law. He has extensive experience in academia and in the public sector. He has already joined us, Professor TK. Prof. Mel Soko, would you please join your fellow panelists? Professor Mel Soko currently teaches international business and strategy at the Wits Business School. Professor Soko's research interests include international business and strategy, trade and investment, economic diplomacy, emerging markets, regional integration with specific reference to Southern Africa, entrepreneurship and business government relations in South Africa. He's a member of the editorial boards of Global Governance, Journal of Common Market Studies, and Africa Growth Agenda. He's an experienced academic, including work as a director of the UCT Graduate School of Business. He also worked as a researcher in various organizations, including to the Select Committee on Trade and Industry, Foreign Affairs, and Public Enterprises in the National Council of Provinces, NCOP, where he was also head of policy and legislation overseeing research. Those are our 4 panelists. The gentleman. And I'll become the gentlewoman in the midst of it. And now what we will do, we'll give them about 10 minutes so that they have a bite and on the theme on advancing inclusive and equitable global governance and development in times of polycrisis, 10 minutes each. And then after that, we can have a very nice conversation. And I think we will start here. Thanks.
Should I think I've got it.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Telela. Good morning, everyone. And thank you also to Professor Adam Habib for that spirited analysis of the current global state of affairs. And I must say that I do agree with most of what you said, even though I do have questions about some of the things you also said. This is a very important topic coming at a topical at the right time, you know, in our historical moments. And I just want to briefly break my presentation into 3 parts, very, very quick. The first part, which Professor Habib has also alluded to, is how the world got to where we are today. And then the second part, I would like to just reflect on how the Trump administration, or the rise of Trump, because we've seen 2 iterations of the Trump administration, the first Trump and the current Trump, how that has changed the world, right? And then the third part is I will frame that in the form of questions in particular about when we talk about advancing an inclusive and equitable global order. Who are the key actors who should be shaping that? What kinds of questions they should be dealing with? What kinds of historical dynamics that we have to tackle in addressing that? So the first point is this. I think I agree with you, Adam. We are where we are because there's been a growing resistance to globalization. Right? And that is largely because, firstly, the rise of China, no doubt about it. China was accepted into the WTO in 2001, and there was a belief in the United States that China could be contained, it could be brought into the liberal international order to become like typical Western countries, embrace liberalism, market economy, and all that. So there was that belief in the United States in particular, but that did not happen. And then also there's been a resistance to globalization, partly brought by the failure of the Doha round of trade negotiations. So the WTO is currently stalled. It's not moved in many ways in terms of advancing the liberal trade agenda. And that has created a situation where some countries have decided to embrace what is called bilateral trade agendas, signing FTAs outside of the WTO, some of them signing regional FTAs, what is called plurilaterals. And so that has created a loss of confidence in the multilateral trade system. Now, this resistance to globalization has found expression in different ways. For instance, the rise of Trump in the US, the rise of right-wing populist governments in Europe, like in Hungary, Viktor Orban and many other leaders in Europe, and also in Italy, with Giorgio Meloni. And then we also saw, the Trump administration in its first installment expressing support for Brexit. That was an illustration that the Trump administration, is against globalization. And then the other point we should not ignore is that is the emergence of a multipolar world, right? Where countries like China, India, and Brazil became major powers within the global trading system. Traditionally, historically, the global trading system has been dominated by what is called the Quad. That was the United States, the EU, Japan, and Canada. But over the past decades, that changed with the rise of these countries, China, India, and Brazil, and others. And that created a situation where the traditional dominant parties within the WTO felt threatened by competition, and hence, the resistance to further reform of the global trading system. And then another factor that has created the situation we are in today, the fractures, was the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, which undermined the legitimacy of the international financial system. And then you spoke about the rise of resource nationalism as well, which was a very important consideration in terms of the loss of confidence in the multilateral system. Now, the big issue here, the elephant in the room, and which you alluded to, this is all about China and the United States. Right? The United States is very clear about the threat that China poses to its dominance of the global system. And I think the response by the Trump administration and even previous American administrations has been to counter the rise of China. If necessary, stop China's rise, which has been described as peaceful rise in the past. And so the belief that was propounded previously by American administrations, including the Clinton administration, was that by bringing China into the WTO orbit, that will make China a responsible stakeholder in the global system that will help promote international trade rules, that it will promote market economy and all that. So that has not occurred, and that is one of the causes of the tensions that have developed between the two countries. And the Trump administration in particular has aggressively pursued policies and strategies that not only seek to impede China's ambition to become a global superpower, but also to upend the liberal international order, right? So what we're seeing currently with the Trump administration is an attack on globalization, but also to upend the liberal international order that has guided global affairs since 1945, after the end of the Second World War, right? And what were the key principles of that order? Firstly, I think the US having played an important part in shaping the post-1945 world order, it saw as its role to play a part in, firstly, becoming a stabilizing power, right? After the inception of that order. Secondly, to forge strong alliances underpinned by shared values, which are fracturing now. As we see now, the US is very interesting now, characterizes Canada and even the European Union as adversaries. These are traditional, tried and tested allies, but today it characterizes the adversaries, in some cases, as enemies. And also, there was an establishment of a set of international agreements that have underpinned the global order. So that is what Trump is attacking, right? The rise of the World Trade Organization and its predecessor, the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the establishment of the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, that is unraveling under the Trump administration because Trump does not see the US's role as the protection and stabilization of the global order. You want to talk about providing those collective goods, global goods, and also, incurring the losses as a result. So that is why the approach is transactional, right? It's more transactional. The focus is not on values. The focus, all those kinds of things. So this is a very important consideration that one has to take into account. Now, how to advance an inclusive and equitable global governance? I have a number of questions here. So who will provide the leadership? Right? Since 1945, the leadership has been provided by the US, which has also implicitly agreed to take on the cost associated with underwriting the global order. Now, who is the next candidate to take over from the US? As we, the US declines, as some analysts have said. Will it be China? It seems to me that China currently has the necessary material capabilities to do that. Strong military, technological power, also economy. The economy is very strong, so it has the material capabilities. But if it is to assume this role, is it interested in assuming this role? And on what values will it be? The normative underpinnings of that order that China, would lead. And China has become very assertive, in my view, having observed the country over the years. Initially, with the start of Deng Xiaoping and the successive presidents, China, it played a very low-key role in terms of its global projection, but I think it has become very assertive under President Xi Jinping. And whether it is ready or is interested or is keen to take on the role of global leadership remains a moot point. And I think there's also the issue about the reform of the Bretton Woods institutions, which are also under attack. I saw the US Treasury Secretary issued a statement not long ago, saying that the IMF and the World Bank must stop what is called mission creep, right? Undertaking projects beyond their traditionally defined roles. For instance, they should not get involved with matters related to climate change, health, and all those kinds of things. So that's very, very interesting. So what is the future of these institutions? The reform, the quota system, and all those kinds of things. And then the other part is the G7. It's very interesting that the G7 was established to promote global economic coordination, and it was consisted of countries that had the largest economies in the world. But it's very interesting that China, which is the second largest economy in the world, is not part of the G7. That's a very interesting dichotomy. And then as I said, the reform of the Bretton Woods institutions. So, Chair, in summary, I've raised those issues, and I'm happy to to elaborate on these. But I think that to agree with Adam, we are seeing a great deal of change happening in the world. It's a historical moment, and how countries respond to that, including South Africa, will determine their location in a global political economy. There's a lot that is happening, in terms of the global economy, which will have extreme ramifications, especially.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Soko. We'll cycle back, but we'll give now the panelists, each panelist, by the number of issues we'll pick up, because you seem to converge in some aspects with Professor Habib, and there were some questions, and also including Trump 2.0, whether this one is different from the first Trump administration. Professor TK, what's your take on the inclusive global governance and its equitability?
Well, good morning to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Telela, and thank you to obviously the principals of the NSG, our dean, and to Professor Habib. Just probably a disclaimer. I was going to be cool, try to be academic, but these glasses are kind of in my way, so I'll just put them down there. I think my retort will just maybe focus on five key things, kind of stemming from Professor Habib's the presentation, and I will. It's always good maybe just to give a reference to some of the, as he was speaking, some of the books I think I found quite relevant in when he was speaking. Key among them was obviously is Tandeka Makande, whereas running while others walk. And there's also, who I think is actually quite pertinent at this moment in time, Samir Amin's Delinking Towards a Polycentric World, which is a book I think everybody should get, very hard to get. And also a former head of school, Professor and now Ambassador Mzukisi Kobo's Political Economy of China, US Relations, Digital Futures, and African Agency. And also Kishore Mahbubani's lecture which the NSG hosted, and also his key book on Asia's Century, and I think other works he puts in there. I reference these because I think they give us 5 key ways in which we can interact with Professor Habib's work. One is he speaks about strategic autonomy. But when you really read what Samir Amin wrote in 1990, is that really still a path for Africa to go towards? Because when you speak about strategic autonomy, Prof. Habib almost seems to say, and I don't want to put words in his own mouth, because we know that's not a very good idea, he comes back, it's almost like saying, how do you better a faulty system? And that for me kind of moves away from what Samir Amin was actually warning African states about, that listen, to answer your question directly, there is no equity in this. There is no justice in this. The only people that seem to want justice in this is always African states, which is always odd. Because if you speak to Chinese officials, they understand the world as it is, not as, as they fantasize it to be. So I think we did need to look at what Samir Amin was talking about to say, does it really make sense that that's what we should be looking towards? So that will probably be my first retort and question to Professor Habib is, do we really want to go in that direction to go back into the world, or do Samir Amin's warnings come back to show us that this really is not a world that we should be looking at, and we should maybe be looking at how do we better ourselves? When I use the word strategic delinking, I put in my own nuance to say, listen, and you're right, Professor Habib, the economies of many African countries are not at the point where we can be like China to simply say, at a tariff debate, no, we're not doing this. We'll just go up a number. I don't even think we can go up by a number. But I'm just really raising the question to say, if we're going to think, as you've challenged us to think like the Chinese, not in terms of an election, not in terms of an ANC election, an NEC meeting, but in terms of iterations of 10 to 20 to 30 years, I think Samir Amin's words do come back and I think quite haunt us about, look, let's really think about this. Now, you're right in saying the Africa Free Trade Agreement is possibly a way we can go forward about, but it does really maybe raise the question to say, is it merely an economic tool, or should it be something where, I think as I put it here, it's a policy shape-shifting idea which needs to go right down to the ground of every African country. I had the pleasure of being in Rwanda, East Africa 2 weeks ago. And I have to admit, there's a colleague of mine who I always have issues with in the school, Dr. Lukaba. Dr. Lukaba is a avowed Pan-Africanist. And I never quite get the idea of Pan-Africanism because I'm a nationalist. I'm a South African nationalist. I do not hide that. But when I was there, it really did hit me that they are getting integration right, even before the Africa Free Trade. And the integration is different to SADC in that you can actually feel and you actually see the economies of that region are going up. So the idea of the Africa Free Trade should not simply be a trade idea, it should be an issue of saying, is it really inherent in all the policy areas and dimensions and institutions in every African country? And just looking at our SADC, I don't think that's the case. So the Africa Free Trade, you're right saying, where does it really fit in? I worry because I think a week back our government said, as of 2025, we've made, is it $820 million or billion from the Africa Free Trade. That's good. But where is that next step, which says, listen, South Africa, and as I said, I did say I'm a South African nationalist. I do not hide it. But where is the idea of South Africa leading SADC? South Africa has been at the wheel of SADC. Speak to individuals and people who are in Zimbabwe. They'll tell you Zimbabwe is on the brink. What has our government said about that? Yes, celebrate 800 billion, right? I don't want to be like a former president and mix my millions and billions here. But where is the leadership in the region? We've seen what's happened in Mozambique. South Africa has been silent. Maybe this goes back to the point you raised, Professor Habib, about, and this is a point Professor Makandawera raised about capacity and planning and capacity within the state. That you're right in saying our diplomatic corps I wouldn't say it's depleted, but I think it's, and I always say it's not depleted because I always make this point. And if you follow Professor Busani Gaweni on Subtract, is it Inanda? What is it? Inanda Proverbs. He makes a point which I always think gets missed in academia and also gets missed in mainstream media. If you speak about talent and human capital, and you only limit it to the ANC people see, it kind of takes away people like Professor Adam Habib. I'm not going to say what your political leanings are, but there are many people who are warm towards the ANC, but the ANC is not warm towards them. Some of my supervisors are very pro-ANC academics and scholars, but they fully know that they don't have a place in the world. So how do we square that up, Professor Habib, that when we speak about skills, we can't just say, oh my word, there is no skills. The ANC has tons of skills. It's just that the ANC doesn't want to use its own skills. And then there is the question about when we speak about diplomacy, Africa Free Trade, and also the idea of strategic, what I call strategic delinking, taking from Samir Amin, we also have to ask questions about our society and institutions. Key among them is higher education. When you look at what higher education is teaching, and obviously Professor Cohen, WITS is great. We are on top of everything, so there is no problem in WITS. What I'm saying, look at the degrees we're offering in relation to the idea of the polycrisis. And I hate the word polycrisis because it's akin to, we don't even make the distinction, but what is a faux pas of a state and what is an actual polycrisis? When Professor Habib speaks about water infrastructure and he speaks about local government, that's not a polycrisis. That's simply that when the government is not doing its job. So we probably also need to probably delineate what do we actually mean by polycrisis. I heard you speak about, I think Professor Gaweni spoke about the medical field. The medical field has a brilliant analysis of what you mean by polycrisis because the human body is a key example of a system. When you're not eating correctly, when diseases come about, when you should hit X amount of height, X amount of weight, for you to be able to understand all those, that's a way of looking at something in a system's value and in a way of a way. But I don't think we do that when we look at the polycrisis in South Africa because our problems are such that, I always say this, you don't need a PhD to sort them out. Everybody knows what South Africa's problem is. The only issue is the people who are governing us, the political elite, seem not to understand that bit. So it really raises the question, what are our higher institutions teaching? Because at our most apex degrees, it's always been, it's engineering, it's a BCom in accounting, to become a CA, it's a medical degree. Those are great, and South Africans do well the world over with those degrees. But do they really move the needle in terms of what's coming, in terms of the technological shift? Because we're still, Dr. Telela, yes, and we're still technological, how do I put it? We're obese with technology. We take most of what America gives us. So when we say America is going to be displaced, the only country that can rightfully say that is a country that can produce Hawaii. And when you go to Hawaii. When you go to their campus, I had the pleasure of going to Jinan and Shandong province, actually going to the Chinese Communist Party's campus. They've got an actual campus. I know one party is still saying they've got a school, but these people have got an actual campus. They're understanding what technology does for you. So we can't speak about strategic delinking without actually looking at the idea of saying, where are our institutions of higher learning to advance us? If we're still doing university in the same way, and maybe just as I close off there, as a slight example of what I mean, university is doing it the same way. You still come in to do a BA,
Yes, TK, there's so much there. I mean, we'll circle back the very contestation between a nationalist posture, being a typical South African versus a Pan-African one. And where does that leave us, especially with the African continental free trade? And if we're talking about protocols of expansion, especially post-GATT and post-WTO. So there's a lot there that will come back and circle back to it. We proceed to Prof. Gawam, who will share his insights.
Okay, thanks, moderator. So distinguished guests and fellow participants, it's with great pleasure and a deep sense of honor that I come here today. So I'm a researcher from IWEP of CASE. So permit us to spend several minutes to introduce briefly about the case to you all. So Chinese Academy of Social Science is the premier academy organization and comprehensive research center of People's Republic of China in the field of philosophy and social science. And the Chinese Academy of Social Science established in May 1977, 1 year before the reform and the openness. And the Chinese Academy of Social Science is now made up of 31 institutes and 45 research centers. We have more than 4,200 staff members, of which more than 3,200 professional researchers. And we have 5 academic divisions, include philosophy, literature, history, economics, social politics, and the legal studies, international studies. So I'm from Institute of World Economy and Politics. It's from belong to the International Study Academic Division. And besides IWEP and another, we have Russia, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia Studies Institute, American Study Institute, and the Europe Study Institute, Japanese Study Institute, Latin America Study Institute, and the China Africa Institute, as well as Asia Pacific Institute. So it's the basic situation about the CAS. Actually, since CAS establishment and conducting broad international academic exchange remains one of the CAS guidelines. Right now, CAS has established a constructive relationship with over 200 research organizations, academic communities, and related government department, covering more than 80 countries and regions. So I hope my sharing, my presentation, not only share China's perspective on global South-South countries cooperation, but also can spark our more in-depth discussion and cooperation in the future. So this is the brief introduction about the CAS and our international study academic division and our Institute of World Economy and Politics. So I will, because of the time limit, I will quickly and briefly introduce my presentation. So my theme of presentation is China's trade and investment cooperation with Global South country. So the content include 4 points. The first point is Global South countries are important partners of China right now. And the second point I want to share with you is what China can offer to the Global South countries. The third point is why Global South countries favor China. Actually, and several professors have very high expectation about China's role in the next world orders. So I will provide some China's, opinions about this issue. The finally point is outlook about the China and Global South countries cooperation in the future. So the first point I want to emphasize that according to the trade and investment, China become the most important partners of Global South countries. You know, China's top 20 trading partners in 2024. Most of them belong to Global South countries, like India, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Chile, Iraq, and South Africa. Actually, South Africa is the China's, rank 18th, big trading partners in 2024. So this is maybe a cross-sectional comparison. So if we can put the time longer, and in time series data, we can also see the development between China and Global South countries trade, especially China and Africa cooperation in terms of trade. So if we, from the anchor of investment, we can see that China invests more and more in the Global South country. So of course, we actually, through different platforms and initiatives like Belt and Road Initiative and the China and Africa Cooperation Platform and so on. So actually in 2024, we can see from the data and more than 89.5% investment is in the developing Global South countries. Only 10% and 10.5% investment in advanced country. So of course, and China invest different area, has different patterns. For example, in Asia, we focus on the leasing and the business sector. And in Africa, we focus on, China's investment more focused on the construction and then on the mining. So it's depend on the different areas comparative advantage. So maybe in the summary, I will provide some suggestions to how to improve China's trade and investment cooperation with Global South country. So the second point I want to emphasize is what China can offer to the Global South country. First is a huge market. So Professor have mentioned before, China has more than 1.4 billion populations right now. So we have a huge demand for different kind of goods, especially high quality goods like agriculture and services and so on. So, and China has very big supplies in trade with other countries, but actually China has big deficit with developing Global South country. For as to the South Africa, in 2024, we have more than $88 million deficit with South Africa. Yes. So the second point I think the China can offer to the Global South country is our goods. Have comparative lower price and high quality goods to the Global South country. And China's cooperation with other countries is different with advanced country. China usually provides the best goods to the developing countries. And maybe you can, the goods I consumed in China is the same with the goods we export to other countries. It's different with United States and other Western advanced countries. They usually provide lower level goods compare their domestic consumptions to the global South country. So I mean, China can provide good quality and low price, real price products to the global South country. I think it's another effect on global South countries' development, because we also can provide high quality intermediate goods to global South country. So global South country can, through this channel and integrated the global value chain, and can get benefit from this integration. So this is my second point. So of course, China's government want to increase the cooperation between, global South country. So we also provide some, incentive and encouraging policies to boost this kind of cooperation. Like you all know the Belt Road in the initiative, as well as forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit. And maybe you also know we set up an Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIB. You know, and the developing country, global South country, want to develop their economy and increase their capacity in manufacture. That usually need, modern and update infrastructure system to support their development. So, but most of developing country usually lack of enough fund, talent, technology. So I think China's government, through this initiative, platform, forum, and the bank, to provide support related to resources like talent, fund, and technology. So of course, China are willing to negotiate with other countries, especially global South countries, to negotiate free trade agreement. Actually, right now, China has 23 free trade agreement with other countries. So covered more than 30 countries and regions. So I hope that China can negotiate with other global South countries, especially in Africa. So I think it will bring more opportunities to real development and system, rule, and other aspect. So maybe I must emphasize China's investment and trade organization is inclusive. So there are many reports and research related to China's cooperation with other countries. This the basic conclusion is that China's investment and trade can help to create new job opportunities to the host country. And of course, there are some criticisms about China's investment will bring so-called debt trap. So, but China's investment is productive investment. In the short run, of course, because you need to borrow money from Chinese organizations, and maybe your government debt will increase in the short run. But if this investment, on the manufacturer and other industries, you can increase your capacity to produce and other aspects. So it will bring more revenues through this productive investment. So in the long run, the debt will become smaller and smaller. So it will help to improve your capacity to develop your economy by yourself. So the third point is why the global South country support or favor the China's style or pattern to cooperate with other countries. I think the biggest difference is China will not force other countries to take side between United States and China. So China usually insist mutual respect, mutual benefit, so we can benefit from the joint project or other channels. So maybe I can emphasize another point about the leadership, next leadership. As I know, China's government insist we are not the next leader of the world order. China usually just provide a selection to these countries. So we think with China's cooperation style is different with other developed country provide. So we just provide a choice to the developing countries. So you can select or you cannot select. It's depend on yourself. So we just provide choice. So the last point is outlook. Maybe I will shortly. So the rule of the first point is the rule of global South country in China's trade and investment will become more and more important. I mentioned before. And the next China's trade and investment cooperation with the global South country will continue to operate. From the scale or in depth. So the third outlook is, China will continue to expand its opening up. So we will, developed based on our specialized or Chinaized road. So we want to continually provide support to the global South countries, not even technology, but also talent. I think the talent may be sometimes more important than the fund and the technology. So China also should have established rules and mechanism for global South cooperation. I think it's also very important. So lastly, I think China should work with the global South countries, include South Africa, to advocate an equal and orderly multi-polarization and inclusive economic globalization. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Gao. I think we will circle back because I was interested the number of important issues that you raised: development, China's posture on trade deals and investments. But we'll circle back on leadership, that, seemingly reluctance, especially in the context of advocating for a more mature, multipolar world, but still seemingly reluctant. But let's proceed to Mr. Kubai, your insights, sir. Inclusive and equitable global governance.
Thank you, ma'am. A number of issues Professor Habib has dared us to confront, in a more, practical way. I agree with him. We have to, deal with the world as it is. There's a new reality. We have a Trumpism dominating global discourse on important matters today. But I was, as a prof was, presenting that, I was thinking, okay, so you have a Trump, that comes in, weaponizes, tariffs, trade war, and so on. Apologies. Attacks, multilateralism, including the United Nations, its institutions, and so on. What has its allies been doing in that same period, right? Is it a new thing? Is it a new thing that just emerged, suddenly with Trump? I mean, Prof says, this is the latest salvo, right, if you like. What have been these other salvos, and by who, and so on. We'll come back to that, maybe just to have a quick look at, at least what I think, is a major issue for the United States. It's, domestic problems. I think that's, in my view, where the issue is. Where Trump's efforts really get at least in his mind or in his way attempting to solve. I don't think that he will, but that's just me. So you've got the United States that has got a significant debt. You've got the United States that has created a system created a system that over the years, over the decades, has benefited it well, richly, but it has also allowed, for, its domestic, situation to collapse, well, not collapse, but to deteriorate, to an extent of, what is it, a deindustrialization, right? Greed, has set in corporate, culture. People have, decided, hey, look, financial markets are easier, to, tap into for a quick buck, rather than investing in infrastructure or investing in, the real economy, the productive, economy, and so on. And now they're, facing, a bit of a crisis in that regard, and trying to reverse it. But they're trying to reverse this without necessarily dealing with, the internal challenges, right, that led to, that situation in the first place. That is the first argument. The second one, is that, I was preparing for a paper this one time, and looking into some of the research that has been done about the U.S. Domestic situation. And I came across a report, Global Trends 2035, prepared by the National Intelligence Council of the United States. And it was released just at around about the beginning of the Biden administration. And one of the interesting things it highlights there is the immense contribution to instability, or the nature, the size, but the significance of the threat posed by inequalities, right? Compared to that posed by adversaries, say China, Iran, Russia, and others. I mean, inequalities, was listed as among, the top, challenges that the U.S. actually faces. Of course, you don't hear the United States talking about inequalities, very often. It's not I mean, that's something you normally reserve, for underdeveloped economies and that sort of thing. A big, giant economies can't possibly talk about, in domestic challenges such as inequalities and whatnot. Even if we see it on the screens, in movies, in people's tourist videos on social media and all of that. So you have that, right? Inequalities, and Prof also touched on, but you've got the pie not being shared broadly enough, among everybody. And in fact, one of the biggest constituencies of President Trump happens to be that population that is a bit struggling a little bit with ends meet. It's struggling as I'm to put it crudely. You've got this white group of many, a population that has not even got to university and so on and so forth, struggling to make ends meet, struggling to find jobs and struggling, feel, that there are others that are coming in and taking their space, taking what is, rightfully theirs and so on and so forth. But now you also have, black caucuses, for instance, in the United States also, seemingly, starting to, find some sort of resonance, with Trump's, efforts. Yeah, but domestic issues, are to such, of such a challenge, such a monumental challenge, that these days you're starting to hear Congress, people, Senate, people talking about the possible threat of, de-dollarization, for instance. What it could mean, especially with, the US's, heavy debt, burden, as well. Its challenges, with the budget, deficits, and so on. Monumental challenges, that they're facing. Now, when we look at the troubles, that everybody else is facing, in trying to find inclusivity and equity in global governance, in the wake of, something of this nature in the United States, I mean, I would tend to go with those that say, look, the reality is, this is a mean world. There's no, it's a world. The United States, well, certainly, Donald Trump administration, does not seem to be interested, in delivering or in advancing, any dialogue, on inclusivity on it. In fact, that attacking it. And it has been like that for quite some time. So whether be it, talking about UN Security Council reform or, global financial architecture reforms or, there's no apparent, at least in my view, effort, to want to meet, the challenges of, the global South, certainly Africa, in any, material way. There's a commentary, from the IMF, Gita Gopinath, in fact, and her colleagues, talking about, the trends, right? The FDI trends, how they seem to be, taking, a very dangerous, course these days. They seem to be, shifting towards more, alliances, right? Political alliances. So you'd have, for instance, US money, going towards, countries that, are more, in tune with, Donald Trump, thinking, or American, thinking, and nobody else. And something similar, seems to be happening with European money as well. And this is not talking about ODAs, by the way, just, FDIs, and other financial flows, and so on, starting to take, that sort of tune. Basically, you have a world that is, disintegrating, right? You have a world that, is fragmenting, at a very dangerous pace, and the IMF is warning, against that. Now, when you're facing, a situation of this nature, what is it, for Africa to do, under the circumstances? I like to be a bit of an optimist, if you like. There's something can be done. A little something can be done. We can't, for instance, just fold our arms and say that, oh look, there's a Donald Trump, the multilateralism is facing an end. I hold a different view. The first, there's global momentum, towards, firstly, reforms, reforms of the same, multilateralism that is under attack by Trump. That's the first point to make. I mean, you had, you're having FFD4, happening right now, very shortly around the corner. You've had, Summit of the Future, You've had, a range, of, dialogues. Basically, the whole world agrees that something is wrong, right? And, therefore, there have to be, certain reforms to, the way the world is run, the way, states, countries, societies relate with one another. So that's, certainly there. You have the sense I'm getting is, you have a globe that certainly appreciates a multilateralism. They want to improve a multilateralism rather than attack a multilateralism. So the challenge that Africa faces, it is not facing alone. It is facing essentially with the rest of the world. What is the rest of the world essentially saying, about, Trumpian attacks, on multilateralism and so on? And what can Africa then do to work with like-minded rest of the world to engage for a better deal for itself in this regard. South Africa, we've tried to play our role on the continent. We often don't discuss I think enough where things went wrong since 2008, for instance. Why? Well, we talk about a whole host of state capture matters and so on, but but the I think a granular detail of where the state and its entities has essentially gotten it wrong. I appreciate the NSG has been trying to do has been doing a lot of work to try and raise the discourse on some of these issues. But there again, I think there's no. I take an optimistic view. There is massive potential, in South Africa, in South Africa's future. I believe. I agree with Professor Boer. I agree with Professor Habib. There's massive talent, that South Africa has. It has no shortage. Now, a question I've often been asking, colleagues, saying, okay, fine, you take the China example. China did not get to where they are today, overnight. It took, about decades, of painful sacrifices, incredibly hard work, and so
more than 40 years.
More than 40 years, right? Are South Africans, for instance, willing to, put in that kind of, time, to and of sacrifice, to get to where they want to get, in another, I don't know, whatever number of years. And I think not. I think most South Africans don't want to have to suffer, any further. Meaning, they would much pretend or much rather have, a situation where, at the end of apartheid, essentially bringing in, that, a massive development and, all of those things. It pains, some of us, when you see, something that I think President Mbeki liked to, criticize a lot, this gratuitous consumption, matter. You have some, that have accessed, state resources, and so on, flaunting that as wealth, in neighborhoods of people that, are really, really struggling. You can't have such people. If you want to convince such people who see these things, convince them that, look, for us to get to from point A that is bad and point B that is much better, we need further sacrifice. Of course, they're not going to believe you. They say, hang on, who do you want to suffer even further when, you can clearly see that there are people there that are, so the ability to plan, is certainly something that South Africa and broader Africa needs to work on, especially some of the requisites of planning. You need to, if you're going to be able to plan, you need to be able to have people that can manage plans, that can manage projects, project management, literally delivering projects at scale, on time, on budget, and so on. These are some of the issues that we find in some of the research that we do at our institute. Some of the deficits, that are there. We talk a lot, about the need for agency, improve, African agency on its own affairs and so on. But, there are some of these challenges that it first has to overcome. How can it overcome this? There's this one, argument. The US did not become what it is, by itself, right? Certainly there were German scholars, and others, that went to establish universities. I mean, the Ivy League schools, for instance, that you have there, they didn't just, come up. At some point, there was hardly any, body, of academics or, that came from somewhere. It was imported, by, by and large. Similarly, so other countries, with the other examples, there's an argument that Japan, for instance, was assisted to get to where it is by the same country that, dropped the, atomic bombs on them, forces, and others. Africa, similarly, can look, at striking some of these relationships, to develop, firstly, the capacity, capacity to plan, the capacity to strengthen its capacity of state institutions, and so on and so forth. But, also look at, the import, of highly, technical, highly specialized skills at universities. People bring people to come, just like the United States benefited from, such, an exchange. People to come and, set up, research and development, train young people, invest, in, the capacitation of our educators, educate our people and that sort of. We might, find ourselves, moving somewhere, but even that would take time. Even if you were to get the best educators, flocking to South Africa or flocking to Africa, even that would take time to eventually bear fruit. And I ask the question again, would Africans, would the South Africans, be willing to say, okay, fine, it will take us, so many years or, so much time, to get to, where we ideally want to go. Just, those few, remarks to make to start off.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gugbai, for your reflections. So South Africans aren't keen to make sacrifices. Is the word operative word yet? Or that would still come? Because I can see where you're coming with that. Now, Prof. Habib, it would seem that they converge with you on certain aspects. Of course, typical intellectuals and scholars, they also have points of divergence with you. Now, I will give you an opportunity to sort of round up, but I want to come back to you, Professor Soko. Given all the dynamics within the global governance architecture, we've spoken about the challenges, current and past, and what we inherited in the global order, whether you're talking post-World War II, post-Cold War era, whatever, post-GATT, post whatever. But we're still dealing with those. And given the Trump 2.0, not very different maybe from the first one, but this one more really at a rapid pace, trying to upend the international order as we know it, imperfect as it has always been, really defined by inequality. I'm wondering if we're talking reforms on global governance, especially reforms that would fundamentally center equality as one of those key aspects and aspirations as in the United Nations Charter. Where must we go? How do we approach this? Do we go bipolar? Do we go multipolar? But with the disinterest of the United States to pursue that role that it was given, and I'm putting it in inverted commas, who is the next candidate to ask? How do we deal? Do we deal with a world where globalization really is not on the agenda? But how do we do away with that given the interconnectedness of countries, of everything else that's happening in the world? It sounds like a lot of mess there. But how does this moment of Trump, including the crisis of this moment, tell us? Must we pursue reforms on global governance relentlessly? or we find ourselves at critical junctures that we need to perhaps redefine that? What would it look like? Because,
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Telela. I think it's very clear to me that if I were to choose between a bipolar or the global order, the multipolar, it would be a multipolar. But the multipolar world needs to have a leader or leaders. And the US has carried, the post-1945 global order on its shoulders for decades.
Yes.
And to be a leader is not just about deriving benefits. So the benefits for the US, for instance, was having the dollar as a reserve currency. That was a benefit, but there are also costs to underwrite costs. The costs had to do with, for instance, providing the security umbrella for Asia, for Japan, for Taiwan, and also other and also Europe. And when I look at the countries, especially those in the developing world that have the potential to assume this role, China is the first amongst equal, right? Because it has developed all these capabilities. The largest market in the world. The largest foreign reserves in the world, the biggest merchandise trader in the world. China has never been a vassal state of the US, so that gives it, all these things. So, but is it ready to do this? And what kind of vision of globalization? So if we say globalization as we know it, is done, right? The decrease in trade in goods will probably be replaced by, because of the technical change, it will be replaced by the rise in exchange of electronic information. The rise of AI will be the new form of globalization that we'll see. But what vision, and I understand the reluctance of the part of Chinese leadership to, what vision, alternative vision of globalization are we talking about here? Right? There are certain reforms, and reforms are not just global. Reforms are also domestic. Right? It's not just about global. And one of the reforms domestically that we're talking about South Africa, it's very clear. We're a very wealthy country. We're a very wealthy country as a South Africa. We have the infrastructure is very developed, the road network, the maritime connections, world-class companies, world-class research universities, and many other, strengths that other countries, including Brazil, our peers, when you look at our companies, the sophistication of our companies. But what we lack in this country and across the broader African continent, leadership and governance. That's our biggest problem. Right? You ask that question. South Africans sacrifice a lot. They sacrifice a lot. I disagree with you. Right? And they are the most resilient, one of the most resilient nations I've observed. But what has failed us is leadership and governance. The same way this has failed countries elsewhere on the continent. And when you're looking at countries like Namibia now and Mozambique, the gas discoveries, oil, and you look at the potential there. We're sitting on mineral wealth, discoveries in oil, discoveries in gas, and all those things. But how do we translate that into wealth for this continent? Into development. Countries that never had this, like Singapore and Japan, never had the wealth, and South Korea never had the wealth that we have beneath the soil. Have been able to, to leapfrog us, and that has to do with leadership and governance. It boils down to leadership and governance. Why is Qatar, an oil-producing country, different from Nigeria? And we asked ourselves that question, right? it's a leadership issue. It's a governance issue, in my view. There are many other things. I don't want to be simplistic. Right?
Yes.
So the reforms have to happen at the global level.
Yes.
Of course, we need to have equity in terms of representation. There are some reforms that have been implemented, and they are not enough, but they have been. We can't claim that there have not been reforms. For instance, the increased representation of China in the IMF, right? That is but the key thing is, who is going to lead this new order? For me, that's a key thing. India is there, is enjoying the benefits, but is it providing the leadership? China, Brazil, and for me, the main actor, the country that is qualified to do this right now is China.
Why do you need a leader?
Right?
Okay.
So maybe when I say a leader, I mean an anchor. So you need an anchor, right? So maybe leader is too strong on an anchor to anchor the system, right? It might be one or two, might be China, it might be China and the EU, China and the US, but there needs to be an anchor of us.
Yes, and clearly, Professor Gao will talk to that a reluctance, which it's very evident. Thank you, Professor Soko. Professor Tuke, you raised a number of issues: African agency, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and issues of knowledge, talent, broadly governance issues. And now there's that dichotomous uneasiness I'm wanting to pose to you. How does Africa exercise its agency within that broader context, whether it becomes by multipolar or whatever a global governance architecture, and even more closer home, given your nationalist posture? How must South Africa deal with these moments? Is it a question of priorities? Because there's been a critique that, you're busy with ICJ matters and this, but at home it's burning. Can we hold these many contradictions as South Africa at the same time? We hold our moral responsibilities to the world, and the Gaza question is important to us. But at home, we seem to be, falling flat. How does South Africa live with these moments? And we are now dealing with Starlink at the backdrop of last week. Must we breathe, or is it a catastrophic moment? And even so, universities are challenged by you, and I agree, by the way.
Oh, look, it's a big one, eh? It's almost like a PhD topic of it by itself. I'll focus it from the dimension of South Africa. And there's I think the Russian Primakov
Yeah.
doctrine named after the foreign minister and prime minister of Russia. And the doctrine simply says that, and this is how Russia sees itself, that look, it's not normal for Russia to be relevant. Russia must always be a superpower. Now, you have to understand Russia's history for them to make that claim. We don't have a South African. South Africa's doctrine, in a way, I always make this argument with family and with friends that the 1994 moment almost spoiled development in this sense that we thought that was normal. It is abnormal for you to have a generation of a Sobukwe or a Tambo Mandela. That is abnormal. Countries don't just go like that. In reality, and I think the Chinese call it a century of humiliation, right? 100 years of humiliation. Countries go through a lot of problems before it becomes normal. The problem with South Africa is that we thought people like President Mandela in that generation was normal. We made our institutions and we even have this bizarre constitution to be able to say, this is normal. It's not. In truth, countries need to prioritize what you are and what you're not. And the problem with South Africa has always been that because of that 1994 moment, we think we can just be this big player on the continent and that, hey, guys, we have this moral belief because we are Mandela's children and we can do it. And we've got an economy which, like you say, much like America, we don't deal with our domestic issues properly. The reason I cited universities as problems is universities are supposed to tell us, hey, guys, the thing is falling apart. For me, for South Africa to go on the path of being a normal country it needs to start in SADC. And now I might use the word dominate, which might be a bit too hard for people to swallow, but I think South Africa needs to be an anchor in SADC. If you cannot be an anchor in SADC, and let's be very clear, SADC's problem is around it's that country and that particular party named ZANU-PF, which we don't name. That's South Africa. If you cannot deal with ZANU-PF, how in the world are you going to go to Nigeria and West Africa and make a claim? How are you going to, we tried it with that guy in Rwanda, and we said, hey, and he said, hey, back. So,
And it wasn't nice.
and it
hey,
wasn't
back.
nice at all, right? And then, because if we're to fix SADC, if we're being realistic, right? And this is, I'm a policy person, and the writings I do are quite simple. We need to trim government down to 18 ministries. And one of those core ministries needs to be a ministry of SADC.
To 18.
18, 1-8. Let's not give them ideas.
Yes.
1-8. And one of those ministries needs to be SADC. We need to get SADC together and say, look, guys, we don't have to like each other here, but we know our big problem is Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe, you need to behave. Because if you don't want to be part of this community anymore, you need to tell us so that you can go. And then we heavily need to bring in our private sector to say, because the state at the moment does not have the ability to say, listen, 3 things that SADC needs at the moment is infrastructure, infrastructure, and infrastructure. You bring in the private sector to say, listen, we need to be a block. That's what's happening in East Africa. We might not like the model, but then eventually this idea of SADC then needs to spread to where we unfortunately got kicked out of, which is the DRC. It is simplistic, and sometimes that's a problem with policies, that it sounds simplistic, and we fully get the nuances of it. But you note that in what I'm saying, I'm not touching on Trump. Because if you think Trump is not a bug of the system, Trump is a feature. Go listen to President Obama's speech when I think he spoke to the Chinese premier at the time. He was quite honest. America's always been in a bit of an imperialist power. Trump is just the vulgarness of the American system. So if we overly focus on Trump and make Trump this demagogue, we miss the point. That's why I say we come home, let us be humble. As Prof said, let's fix our municipalities. In fact, I say get rid of provinces, cut down municipalities, cut down national government, put our money into infrastructure, go towards SADC and fix SADC. And then when we're in a position in 10 to 15 years, it makes a lot of sense, then we can start speaking about going back to the DRC, speaking with East Africa, West Africa. Yeah. And we still have to decide what's happening with North Africa, because sometimes they're African, sometimes they're not African. Yeah. And then, this is controversial because I know you're on this seat. This idea of we must get some United Nations security seat. Again, it's South Africa's folly. Ratadinto, shiny things. South Africans love shiny things. What will that do for the average South African? If you listen to President Mbeki 2 days ago, he gave us a prime example of what could happen if you're in a United Nations security issue. He speaks about what happened in Libya and about how South African ambassador was hunted to go vote. If you think Trump is a problem, wait till you get a United Nations security seat and the pressures come on you. Now, and I say this in inverted commas for those that are online, we have not felt the pressure of President Putin when he's not our friend. What do you think he'll do to us if we come on the United Nations security thing and America so twists our arm that we start singing like the American canary? We're not ready for that. Why? Because what this Trump situation should teach you is, if your house is not in order, you are nothing in the international world.
So we need to make sure that our house is in order. And it goes back to what Professor Habib was talking about. What is our leverage? And until that's very, very clear, this is why sometimes we have a number of critiques, even within the continent, that South Africa is a reluctant leader, even within SADC. We're reluctant, but also we're a soft, too much power kind of a leader, if you like. We don't like telling each other that, hey, here, you're not doing well. And solidarity, right? Is that how we define it?
I want to, this is a very important point that Prof. TK has raised. You know, in 1999, I attended a function during a state visit by former President Jiang Zemin. It was in Cape Town. They came with Prime Minister Wen Jiabao. And Wen Jiabao made a speech at this cocktail event, which I'll never forget. He said, if you want to project foreign power, you must be strong domestic.
Yes.
Extremely important point. So we want to project foreign foreign power, but we're weak domestically. We have too many problems. Crime, state-owned enterprises are dysfunctional. There's a whole unemployment, all those things.
Yes.
So we can learn from these countries, like where you had your own problems in 1976 when Mao Zedong died. China was very backward in so many ways, but it took the leadership and the governance that you installed to to change the fortunes of the country. The successive presidents, Zemin, Hu Jintao, to change the country. Within 30 years, the country was transformed.
Yes.
And there were not unnecessary foreign entanglements, you see? So we are involved everywhere. Whether we have the resources to match our foreign policy ambitions, we don't ask those questions, right? So I do agree, maybe the time has come for South Africa. It's a big wake-up call to take a breather and say, look, we've done our best, but let's focus on the domestic. Our enemy is domestic. It's poverty, it's inequality. It's not getting entangled in regions which we don't understand in the first place. Do we have the knowledge, first of all, to get involved in these regions, right? So if you're looking at the Middle East, you have Turkey there, you have Egypt, you have Qatar. Those countries, they know more about that region than we know. They're more qualified, right? So why are we entangled there? I understand the issue of the moral standing and all that, but do we have the resources to maintain our presence there and to influence what is happening?
Yes.
Have we asked ourselves those questions?
Yes.
The same can be said about Western Sahara. What is our fundamental interest in Western Sahara?
Yes.
Have we asked ourselves as a country in terms of our domestic priorities? I know it's a principled stance, but how does it enable us to achieve our domestic priorities? I think this is a very important question.
Yes, thank
that
you
you're
so
asking
much.
us.
Thank you so much, Profs. In other words, focus at home first. And Professor Gawo, you were in agreement that it's important to prioritize domestic needs, and which makes sense. But if you, given your point 3, I'm trying to rush because of time, not being unfair to you. Given your point 3 on the why Global South is preferred, in the relationship, especially the trade relationship with China, and then we talking the inclusiveness of global governance, then we talk about who will be the next leader. And I heard you really saying, why must be a leader? Talk to us that, please walk us through that thinking. Leader, the next order, however it will look like, whether it comes tomorrow or never. Why leader? You said,
So thanks for your question. It's a great question. It's difficult to answer. So first, I think I needed to clarify an information about China-Taiwan. So Taiwan is one of our province. So United States never guarantee to provide nuclear umbrella for Taiwan because Taiwan is one of our province. It's very important information.
Yes.
So as to the question about why Global South favor China. So I think I mentioned in my presentation about the China's attitude towards the cooperation between China and the Global South country. And China will not force other country to take side between China and other countries, especially United States. It's different, totally different with United States attitude toward the cooperation between United States and other countries. I think it's the first reason why Global South country support China. And another, because China is developing country, right now it's still a developing country, belong to the one of developing country. So I think in China's, idiom, in the heavy rain, so we need the importance of umbrella. So we will, or we have great willing to provide help or support to the developing country, especially least developed country, because we know the development is very important to the domestic issues like poverty and inequality, climate change, and so on and so forth. So we have experience in these issues, especially in poverty reduction. You know, in the past 10 years, we eliminate absolute poverty in China. So actually, when I visit different countries, the researchers usually ask me the experience China's reduce the poverty in especially in rural area. So I think that the biggest experience or lessons and you can learn is that China's have consistent policies in the past. As you mentioned, in the past more than 40 years, we have one proposed to do our best. So in China, we will create or modify the 5-year plan. Now is we are currently designing the 15th 5-year plan. You know, when the government change, the leader change, but the plan does not change. So we will, we hope country and along the same direction under the 5-year plan and try our best. So this is, I think, why we succeed in the past 40 years. So as to the question about the domestic issues, I think in these 5-year plans, we usually put the people's demand in the top priority of our China's government, like I mentioned before, poverty and inequality and other related to life standards of Chinese population in current time. So as our government mentioned in the strategic competition with United States, we put the domestic problems or issues or challenges on the top priority. So we believe that if we want to, keep our resilience to the strategic competition with other countries, especially United States, we should solve or address our internal issues like poverty and so on. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much. We no longer have time, but you said something that really struck a chord with me. The leaders changed, but the plan didn't.
Yes.
South Africa can really learn from that. We will give you just a few minutes because we're running out of time, and then Professor Habib will make his comments, and then so that we can wrap quickly. I'm wondering, Mr. Kubai, do you want to do any reflections on BRICS and multipolarity? South Africa's participation sometimes defined as strategic within BRICS. Is it really strategic? Just, especially, given Western dominance and all those kind of things. Just a brief bite, and then we can wrap.
Thank you. Just to run quickly. The other day, I was writing a chapter, and one of it is on BRICS, and planning, strategy, and so on. It's important to mention this because, when I was saying South Africans, may find it difficult to sacrifice, I was referring sacrificing in the context of decisions that are taken by a plan with decisions taken by a state, in advancing a plan. I'd say you have a vision, choices, on what to spend on, what not to spend on, and so on and so on. Sacrifices in that regard, right? That is what I was talking about, which the Chinese people seem to, have, had to endure for a long time and, ultimately succeeded. BRICS, similarly, has decision making, to do. It constantly, has to make decisions, choices, strategy on how to advance, towards, this reform, and development agenda that it's, looking at, right? Is it, strategic for South Africa to, to even be there? I think it is. I think it is a lot. There's a reason why the BRICS bloc is popular right now. In fact, the pretty soon you might have, the BRICS bloc essentially dominating, the numbers, at the G20, for instance, whether or not you argue the legitimacy or illegitimacy of the G20, as a grouping, a multilateral grouping or not, point is, bulk of the G20 will essentially, comprise the BRICS bloc. The BRICS bloc now, is increasingly assuming more, prominence, economically, in terms of its, GDP output, compared to that of the G7, and so on and so forth. Being in that, midst, of economies that are rising, economies that have also similar challenges that we do, would only benefit, it can only benefit South Africa. And it can benefit in multiple ways. Firstly, you want, to expand, you want to diversify, your trade partnerships, you want new markets, you want exchanges, in technology. We're talking about, capacitating, for instance, the state, capacitating, our education sector, capacitating our tech sector, and so on. So it certainly does come in, handy to be among, those, developing economies as well, to exchange, and cooperate in a practical way. But all of these things, require planning, require, decision making, require, sacrifice, as well.
Favorite word.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kubai and all the panelists. Thank you so much. We've ran out of time, and because we've got those who are online, we won't even take their questions. We will do just 3 things now. Firstly, I need to thank the panelists, and you are free to take your seats. And as they're taking their seats, I'll ask Professor Habib just a few words, Prof, because there were some comments that were directed to your keynote. I will also take my seat after Professor Habib. Prof Busanti, you can do the wrap quickly, and then Professor Maseko will do the vote of thanks. I won't stand again, so thank you so much, but I'm sorry for the time. When you're dealing with these kind of issues, there is so much debate, multipolar, bipolar. Why expect a fascist, to be fair, and much more. Thank you so much. And also South Africans, why are you not sacrificing enough?
So thank you very much. I'm going to be, we're right at the end of time, so I'm going to be fairly quick. There were two concerns I did have that emerged in the conversation. I think that there's a large degree of agreement about what needs to be done. But there were two senses, two pathways that I was quite concerned about. TK suggested, and I can't see him, suggested delinking as an option. Samir Amin, Arigi, I must say I'm not convinced of that. I think it would be a very, very dangerous thing. I think countries that have tried to delink, Venezuela, other countries, have been devastated. And that's in part not because of fairness, because people don't let you delink on their own. The world is not going to say, okay, South Africa, keep all of the minerals. You can delink and abstract yourself. They're going to want that. And there's going to be interventions that enable to try and undermine that. So delinking is not a realistic strategy in a world that is so globalized and so integrated over not only the last 30 years, but the last 300, 400, 500 years. The second thing is a view that I heard, which is perhaps we should forget about being all or international, we should focus on the domestic. Well, actually, we did that for the last, between 2010 and 2020. We pulled back dramatically on our foreign policy incursions. We focused on the domestic, and frankly, we mucked it up really badly. South Africa's GDP went down in that period, and that's partly because of state capture, because of all of the fractiousness of the South African political elite, and frankly, the failures of leadership that flowed out of that. Here's where I think we have to start. I think the world is mean, and we're going to have to learn about that. We're going to have to grow up and be adults in that world. It's not about fairness. We've got to learn about, if we navigate this world, what is it that we can afford and what do we need from the rest of the world? I think if we want to increase our economic growth, I agree with TK, I agree with everybody. If we're going to do that, we have to do that as part of the global economy. Because actually, our mineral wealth is only valuable if we trade it and we get something in return for it. It has to be, and that's what it has always been. South Africa's economy has always, even at the height of its Keynesian programs, was being integrated into the global economy. So I think that that's the first thing. The second thing we have to do as part of that global economy is we use Africa as an advantage. So TK, I think we should focus on SADC, but I think we've got a relative advantage in the rest of Africa. Firstly, we've got a financial sector that finances the whole continent. We've got the ability of our university systems that can service the continent. We have all of these capabilities that we could be at the center of a continent. And as we work with growing, we've got a private sector that is invested in the continent. And if we can grow, assist with working with the African economy, we ourselves will grow in the process. So South Africa's growth is integrated with the global economy. This takes us to the third point. Whether you like it or not, the world is changing. It's moving towards a bipolar, and depending on what the Europeans do, a multipolar world. You can navigate that world and succeed in that world. The Southeast Asians, South Korea, Taiwan, succeeded in the bipolar world. You can do it. The question is, what do you require to do it? And for me, it requires build a professional public service. That means take skills seriously. Second, be pragmatic. Be able to navigate and be nimble and move. Third, use your private sector and harness it to your national development goals. Don't reject it. Bring it as part of that equation. Four, live with trade-offs. We find it difficult to manage trade-offs. Recognize what are the consequences and make choices based on trade-offs. And finally, have leverage. Your navigation of this world is going to depend on what you have. The only things you can have, if you want to use your mineral wealth, you need to use it better. You need to organize it better. And then Africa, if Africa is a market of 1.5 billion, for 1.5 billion, and it's cohesive and can come together, that begins to become a lever for you as well. So that's the point about this. And I think that's the only point is where I will end. Do we have skills in South Africa? The answer is yes. Are they running the municipalities and the government and the kinds of places? The answer is no. And that's the tragedy of our moment. And everyone, all of us in Alendia, all of us complain about government and leadership. Who elects them? Who votes for them? Why are they there? And why have they been there for 30 years, repeatedly failing? And yet we've put them there. That's the question of our time. I'll stop there. Thank you very, very
much. Thank you. So to do a summary, I mean, it's got lots of risks because I may have to repeat what have been said, but I won't be tempted. So my takeaway from what have been said by Prof. Habib, the panelist, and Prof. FOFGAO is to maybe put forward the following proposition of what needs to be done. I think there are three frontiers that we must confront, and I call these frontiers of national and regional development. Of course, regional I include international. Frontier number one is what myself and Prof. Masego and Habib are doing. Frontier number one is what I call reskilling of leadership. Reskilling leadership for effective decision-making. There's got to be a mastery of statecraft here and in the continent and the rest of the global south. When you reskill leadership for effective decision-making, we will win the leadership away from preoccupation with pomp and ceremony. Because in the majority of cases in the global south, when you think about leadership, we are thinking of people who are immersed in pomp and ceremony, what they are entitled to, and people get very irritated because when you think leadership, you think of people in blue lights and stuff like that. So there's got to be an agenda of reskilling leadership for effective decision making so they can make those choices that you are talking about. The second frontier is that of institution building. So we talk, China and other countries in the global south that are able to navigate the storms of the world that is going through rupture. It's those countries that have been able to build very strong and dynamic institutions and state public institution there is, such that when there is a political change or one individual leaves the institution does not collapse. These are institutions that are dynamic, that can effectively execute the decisions taken by the leadership. These national and regional plans require robust institutions to implement them. And that's a frontier that as development practitioners, we must invest in. And the third frontier I am proposing is that we need to build compacts. Must build compacts domestically so that in our own cases, South Africa, we can manage our domestic or national contradictions. So we have an agreement on a minimum program that we will pursue as a state, private sector, and all other social partners. In the case of China, there is a very clear compact between the states and the private sector, for example. Even on technology, we saw the meeting President Xi Jinping held a few months earlier with people who are leading big tech companies. That was part of a compacting agenda. And so we do need to build compacts domestically to manage national contradictions, but we also need, as has been canvassed here, compacts with our global partners as well. Because to deal with the global crisis or polycrisis, as we are talking about them, you cannot succeed if you are dealing with them on your own or as an individual country. You need to have these compacts. In the global south, there are those emerging, but they need to be consolidated. But these three frontiers presuppose one thing, and it came up in several conversations. It presupposes that as a country or as countries in the global south, that we've got developmental elites, and Prof. Habib has written a lot about elites. It presupposes that we've got developmental elites who are obsessed about national futures, about regional and international futures, whose main preoccupation is where will society be over the next 5-10 years and so on. And what we have seen in the global south in the last 3 decades or so is that the elite that has emerged, to the extent that they may be fascinated about China and Singapore and everything else, they may not necessarily have been what we'll call developmental elites. Of course, Mkhandauri and others have canvassed that point. That is what I think is required to take the country forward. And the reason we convene conversations like these ones, and there's a series of others that we will be doing, is precisely because we are hoping that what will emerge is a kind of a mindset shift from those who are in leadership position to be obsessed about development so they can manage these three frontiers. I hope I represented the conversation well. Thank you very much. Prof. Masego.
Okay, colleagues, thank you very much, Busani. My task is to just thank each and every one of you for staying on, firstly attending the session, staying on here on campus, but those who joined us online as well. These conversations are essentially about creating a platform for those who are in government, those outside of government, to interact with intellectuals and scholars, to think about global issues affecting us on a daily basis. And we believe that, in fact, by calling you to come and have these conversations, we're already setting a stage for important discussions and debates to take place. And as you saw today, very difficult questions arose. Some strong statements were made affecting every aspect of our public life, but that's essentially the role of universities, to create a platform for discussions to take place. So let me conclude by thanking Busani, the principal of the NSG, for partnering with us to convene this dialogue. Busani, I'm also acknowledging you as a member for visiting staff at the school. So this is actually part of your deliverables. But what I did not tell everybody here is that at the end of this session, there's going to be an examination. So don't get ready to leave. But I want to thank each and every one of you for spending the afternoon with us here, and especially Dr. Gao and your delegation from IWIP. This was a very inspirational and important discussion, and thank you very much for joining us. And the panelists as well for expressing your views frankly and openly. And I thank Dr. Telela for facilitating and moderating. And finally, I thank my team for organizing this event, Mane Kemantha for making it possible. And this brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much. There's also lunch to be served, so please don't leave. Unfortunately, those online can't join us, but lunch is served. Is there anything? Okay, there'll be a group photo for all the panelists and our visitors. Thank you.